turn the switch on. This is a space for conversations about leadership and decision making in the system that keeps the lights on. I'm Julieta with Electric Power Engineers, and I'll be your host. Today, I am joined by Tanuj Deora, Vice President of Commercialization at SparkFund. Tanuj brings a unique perspective across public policy, utility transformation, and customer-side solutions with previous leadership roles at Uplight and service in the Executive Office of the President. Today, his work sits at the center of one of the industry's biggest questions: how to deliver power faster in a time of rapid load growth. Tanuj, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Juliet. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys. EP has been a great partner for us and excited to get into an interesting conversation.
Great. To start, can you briefly describe your role today and what problem you're trying to solve at SparkFund?
Yeah, so SparkFund has gone through a number of iterations as a company, but we've really become laser focused on this opportunity to deliver capacity to the grid in a way that's been under-realized, really thinking about the grid edge and solving the grid edge capacity opportunity through distributed capacity procurement, in which we are placing medium format batteries on the distribution system in front of the meter at customer sites to help with speed to power, reliability, resilience, all sorts of benefits, renewables integration, and the like. It's a pretty neat opportunity. Excited to get into more details there. My role specifically is I play a couple different roles. So I was primarily hired to help with developing a product and a product strategy around what we do. We are a utility services company, so we don't have a product, a tangible product in the traditional sense, but we want to productize our solutions for utilities in the deployment of distributed capacity procurement so that we can make sure that we're deploying it as widely and as quickly and as efficiently and as effectively as possible. So really trying to industrialize this process of DER deployment for the benefits I just mentioned. So that's my primary role. Right now, I'm focused on our first big deployment and serving as general manager of the Capacity Connect program that we work with Xcel Energy on. Capacity Connect is their name for how they've designed and how we've designed together distributed capacity procurement. And we were excited that we just recently got the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission approval for moving forward with a $430 million program.
Definitely, and we've all been following that, and congratulations, it's really exciting. Before we go into the grid edge and the distributed capacity procurement world and reality, I was going to ask you about the responsibility that we have working in this industry, right? I always like to share, I got hooked working on the grid when I realized, number one, it was one interconnected system being balanced second by second. I just couldn't believe it. So that we customers have power at all times. You know, we take it for granted. That's how it should be. And it clicked for me when I also realized that electricity is not optional, right? So when we work in this industry, it's something that people depend on every day, and it comes with that tremendous responsibility. And you've worked across policy, software, infrastructure. I was going to ask you, when did you first realize that the work you do has real consequences and that if you get it wrong, people might feel it?
Yeah, for sure. As a recovering engineer myself, I appreciate the complexity and the almost miracle, like the real testament to human ingenuity on what the electric power system is. I think it was about a decade ago, maybe a little longer, the American Academy of Engineers actually named the electric power system as the most significant invention of the 20th century. And, you know, we tend not to think of the power system, or the public doesn't think of the power system, as one single invention. But if you think about the history of it, how it evolved, and just how it delivers such value at such reliability and such a low cost relative to the value that we get, it is pretty amazing. And it is critically important. Our economy and honestly our civilization to a large degree is built upon the electric power system. Here, you think about one of the big differences between the quality of life we have in fully developed countries and countries that are not as economically advantageous and as productive, and electric power system is one that jumps out pretty broadly. I did at one point in my career have an opportunity to work in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria back in 2017, 2018, much of my time was spent there. And it really was amazing to see not just the frustration of the impact of that hurricane and how long it took to restore power there, but how much of a priority it became and how much ingenuity was then demonstrated by the people of Puerto Rico in figuring out how to come up with new solutions to recover from that. But the story actually for me goes way back. I was a young engineer in the chemical industry in the late 90s and into 2000, 2001. And in 2000, the end of 2000, beginning of 2001, three things were happening that were really notable. In the chemical industry, we were very sensitive to energy prices. Oil and natural gas were feedstocks for us, but we were a commodity industry. And when the economy went south, things got bad for us. And we had to worry about our jobs and we had to worry about our bonuses and all those types of things. And we saw a spike in oil prices. Now it sounds quaint, but oil first went over $30 a barrel in 2000, 2001. And we all were looking around like a recession's coming. Like bad for us, bad for the whole economy. We kind of knew at that point that it's foundational to the economy. At that time also there's a presidential election that was coming up, and both the Democrat and Republican candidates said that they would sign the Kyoto Protocol if in fact they were elected president. And so we thought we had some good momentum, but really more importantly, there was a broader understanding that climate was a real issue and it was something that we should be addressing on a societal basis. So you got energy is super important. Electric power was at that time the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. We had greenhouse gases are important to start managing when you think about that. And the third element for me was as a young engineer, I realized that I could live my values through my career, that I could be successful in a career and also be able to work towards things that I cared about personally, i.e., our environment and making sure we are good environmental stewards. So that all happened back in 2000, 2001. We had a pretty horrific event that happened at the end of 2001, right? We had 9/11 at 2001, kind of re-emphasized the importance of thinking about how you spend your life and how you spend your career and thinking about this bigger purpose of our collective stability and humanity and economy and civilization. And then, of course, that was related to oil somewhat indirectly, but it was related to oil and energy more broadly. And so I went off to grad school. I got really excited about the opportunity to work in renewable energy, became a wind energy developer, got really excited about participating in the rise of that industry, and then ever since was hooked because of the things that you talked about, the criticality of it, and then the nature of it, what a cool engineering problem and systems problem it really is.
Definitely. So now I was thinking if you can briefly comment about the moment where we're at.
Yeah,
Demand is moving faster maybe than traditional infrastructure timelines
for sure.
can respond, and coming from a decade at least or decades of flat demand in the US. So from where you sit now, we know this speed to growth, power to growth is real. How do you see that challenge, and is it going to be temporary, or this is a structural issue that we need to solve?
Yeah, so we are definitely in a very different paradigm. So I've been in electric power, as I mentioned, from about 2005 onwards in my career. And in 2008, when we had the global financial crisis and the recession that occurred, basically since then we've had almost no load growth. Maybe it's varied geographically place to place, but no load growth until about 3, 4 years ago, where we started seeing a boom in load growth due to a variety of factors. And now we anticipate even more load growth with the advent of AI and the need for power for data centers. But there's also the need for power for electrification of vehicles and heat. There's also the need for power for reshoring and manufacturing in the US. There's just a lot of factors. It's not just about data centers. It's potentially about the vision that, regardless how you feel about AI, that we want to see for a robust economy here in the developed world. And so I think there are some factors beyond just data centers. So even if the data center demand drops off because maybe we don't need as many, or maybe because we have a lot of efficiency in the chipset or other ways of doing the work, there's still going to be demand for growth. And I think the aberration was really the flat period, because historically we've always had a correlation between economic growth, human well-being, and electricity consumption. We had a flat period. Some of that was the offshoring of manufacturing continuing and happening for decades. Some of that was efficiency. We had this massive benefit of LED light bulbs, increased efficiency in space heating and cooling. Those types of things were really helping keep our demand flat. So I do think it's probably more durable than just a question of, is AI going to consume all this power? that we need. But either way, it's an issue, and we're gonna have to figure out how to deal with that. One of the things that was interesting about 10 years ago, I started getting excited about the problem of how do we use the grid edge and how we use the demand to actually help address our resource adequacy concerns. One of the ways electric power systems been set up structurally in terms of business model, regulation, and policy has been, or there's actually been a number of assumptions. One of the big assumptions has been that demand is like interesting, but not core to figuring out the supply stack, right? The supply stack, or how we figure out balancing and resource adequacy, is really about big central power generation. And so about 10 years ago, I joined as chief strategy officer at the Smart Electric Power Alliance. And we were kind of thinking about like, what's the next thing that's going to be an issue? Or what's the next thing that's going to be an opportunity for us? And we started thinking about the grid edge and thinking about a questioning of this fundamentalist first principle of, is it true that demand always follows, or the supply follows demand in terms of generation, and that demand is basically a given, and then supply is what we actually can control? We started thinking about that with the onset of DERs, with rooftop solar, with smart thermostats. EVs were starting to get thought about in a new way. And so we had energy efficiency had been very traditional. It was kind of, I don't want to call it dumb efficiency because it's really, really critical, but we had efficiency that was not dynamic in the way that now we can have with technology, that we can have a more dynamic resource, and potentially a resource that can help resource adequacy in a more profound way. And at that time, we started thinking about, okay, is this going to be interesting? Utilities were interested in the question. I learned a lot from a lot of utility planners and utility engineers in the SEPA framework and the community that we built there. But it really wasn't a strategic priority because we had flat demand. We did not have load growth, and so nobody was really worried about it. As I was in the Biden administration, we were thinking about ways to try to meet a very aggressive decarbonization goal. And we were thinking that was still in a flat demand paradigm. We were thinking about, okay, what can we do to help close the gap? We know that wind and solar are very cost effective at the bulk power system scale. If we can build some transmission, we could probably get to a 70%, build on the nuclear that we have, build on the hydro that we have, keep wind and solar growing. We can get to a certain level, but we're going to have a really hard time decarbonizing the last 20% of the electric power system. So how are we going to accomplish that goal? And so there was an effort around small modular reactors. There was an effort, nuclear reactors. There was an effort around geothermal. There were, a couple other efforts around hydrogen. Really, what became interesting was there could be an opportunity for demand to integrate further levels of wind and solar and these variable renewable energy resources as well. So that got interesting. So I've been doing some of this work in the private sector. We're thinking about this rapid decarbonization goal. And then we get hit with the load growth. And right now, climate is not something we're talking about at the federal policy level, but we are talking about load growth. And one of the great things about the grid edge is, A, it can potentially leverage resources that have already been deployed. The existing fleet of smart thermostats, solar, EVs, et cetera, are not fully realized in terms of what they can do in terms of making demand a more viable resource adequacy resource. But we also have this opportunity to think about how we do it in a way that balances some of this risk, right? So I said, I'm pretty sure load growth is going to happen. But if you ask me how much load growth is going to happen, I don't know. Is it going to be 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%? Who knows? One of the great things about the grid edge is these resources are very, very scalable, i.e. they can scale down and we can do it little by little. At SparkFund, we're deploying 1 to 3 megawatt 4-hour batteries. Making a commitment to start a program to deploy those is very different than making a commitment to deploy even a 50 megawatt peaker all in one go, or a 200 megawatt combined cycle, or a 250 megawatt SMR, which doesn't commercially exist yet, or a 1 or 2 gigawatt nuclear power plant like what they did in Georgia with Vogtle. Those are big decisions that require a lot of commitment. There's a bunch of costs in there. If things go variable, that just gets expanded. With using the grid edge resources, and one cool thing about what we're doing at SparkFund is that we can calibrate. If the load doesn't show up, we can slow down deployment. If the load shows up, we can increase deployment.
This is a great segue to where I was going to go, which is you already touched on a little bit. But then you just added another angle, which is uncertainty. So I was going to tell you clearly that the paradigm has changed from that way of responding to electrification from a central infrastructure perspective, right? I think at the time, to electrify the country, there was a reason we did it the way we did. There was the access to capital at the time, and also the ability to do big projects, which I think you've talked a lot about resource adequacy, but then there's also the challenge of building a transmission line, right? The infrastructure,
Sure.
as much as we want to build, and it is part of the solution, there needs to be other solutions too, because we might not be able to do it as fast as we want. But then you added this angle of uncertainty, right? So I always like to share, I've been in forecasting quite a bit, load and DER, and we now have this certainty that demand is coming. Now, how much you added, and then I would add where and when, right, are great questions that I am really passionate about. But there's definitely uncertainty, and so the solutions also need to come with a level of flexibility to be able to respond to the future. So my question was going to be, what's the challenge really in shifting towards that distributed capacity thinking? What have you run into? But would also love to hear a little bit more about that recent success you already shared with us, which is the work in Minnesota with Xcel Energy and the Public Utility Commission. What have we learned of the distributed capacity model that can work?
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the uncertainty question, I mean, there's ways to manage risk, right? You can manage risk by just throwing a bunch of money at something and saying, "Hey, we're going to plan for every contingency." You can manage risk by just saying, "Hey, we're going to suffer resilience, and we'll think about like whatever happens, we'll just have a backup plan." Or we can think about risk through new innovations in ways of just using new technology in new ways to actually manage down that risk. That's the third bucket. Where in the first bucket would be a real problem with that would be that if we just build a bunch of generation and build a bunch of transmission, besides the practical challenges of actually doing big things, right, which is a challenge. I'm a big fan of the abundance theory and the book what came out on that. But there is a challenge to that in that could drive up affordability challenges. That could make grid less affordable because you're spending a bunch of money perhaps before when you need it. That's going to raise rates, and nobody wants to see that, right? We don't want to pay more than we have to for any of these essential services. So for sure, there's a big downside with building more. I do think we need to build more. I mean, I'm very close to a bunch of transmission folks. Like Rob Gramlich lives not too far from me, and he and I are friends. And I've got a number of friends who are transmission developers and the like. Important stuff, but it has some pros and cons to it. The second thing of just saying, hey, reliability is going to go down, and we're just going to let consumers do their own backup, means that you're going to have unequal outcomes. You're going to have folks who can afford to put a backup generator or afford to put batteries in their house benefit, and you're going to have other folks get left behind. That's a problem from a social equity perspective, because I think we do believe that electricity, while not technically a right, is in fact something important for all of us to enjoy the benefits of, so we can have the society we want to live in. But also it becomes a question on like, what kind of economic development can happen, and do we really want to be in a situation where we only allow economic development to happen for those types of businesses that can manage that kind of risk on their own? It's like, no, we want to make sure that we have that available for our economy to grow and thrive broadly. So the third question becomes, all right, and there's going to be some deployments of resilience resources for those who choose to take that path. But then the third opportunity is like, okay, we've got this new technology. What does new technology enable us to do? One of the things it allows us to do is to use existing resources more efficiently, right? So we have a power system that already exists. The average utilization, depending on grid to grid, runs somewhere between 40 and 70%, depending on which grid you're in. And that it goes from generation, right? So peaker plants are used very rarely. Solar wind have certain capacity factors. Sometimes they're getting curtailed. And then you go all the way down the system. Transmission has to be sized for the peak. The peak can be variable. All right, what are we doing here? So the concept of we can deploy a little bit of technology, spend a little bit of capital, and then use that as a lever to unlock all this capacity that we have in generation and transmission to use it more efficiently and effectively is a huge opportunity. It's a big force multiplier. So for the dollar that we spend on the battery technology, for example, what SparkFund does, we can unlock multiples of that in terms of unlocking the residual capacity of the rest of the system. And so that is a great way to apply new technology and new business models to actually get more out of the grid that we already have, and to be able to manage the risk and affordability concerns that might be out there as well, other than just building more of the same capital. So I think from an uncertainty perspective, we like a portfolio to address any risks. It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that to put that out there. And I think we're really excited about adding this missing piece that can be really, really useful. So this is something, frankly, that the commission in Minnesota got very early on. Excel was trying to manage how they were going to deal with this load growth that's coming to their state. So Excel Energy, was thinking, okay, we need to get an IRP put together to put before the commission so we can address the rising demand from our consumers. And then they were thinking about, we also have this long-term carbon goal. And fundamentally, with the current technology portfolio that they had, it looked like a bit of a challenge. They didn't think expanding the nuclear plant that they operate in Minnesota was necessarily the most cost-effective solution at that time. They had put a bunch of wind and solar in their IRP, but they felt like there were some integration limits to that. And so they were discussing the need for 5 new combustion turbines to help balance the wind and solar they were adding. But of course, that ends up being a challenge for them to actually meet the 2040 clean energy goal. And so they were in a situation where it's like, hey, we got, safe, reliable, affordable, clean, all things are important. We've got 4 input variables. There's other input variables as well in terms of social equity and economic development, whatever. But those 4 primary input variables were not giving them a solution that was going to solve for everything, until our CEO peer and some allies and some other folks in the area said, hey guys, let's think a little bit out of the box of the existing toolkit. If we can add a new tool in that toolbox of distributed capacity procurement, do you think that we can maybe alleviate some of this tension and then reduce the need for these 5 CTs? And that's really where the wheel started turning at Excel. The wheel started turning at the commission, at the stakeholders who were involved in the IRP. And a settlement was actually developed that said, yes, let's go ahead and see if we can incorporate more wind and solar as the primary energy sources if we start putting more storage in the system, including the storage that DCP provides.
That's right. And I'm curious, you've mentioned already several objectives. Killing one bird with a stone, or several birds with one stone. And I was curious, is there also the resiliency angle, given customers experiencing more outages due to weather events? Was that also part of the discussions with Excel and the Minnesota Commission?
Yeah, and that's where the vision gets really exciting. So we're not putting any resilience value into our benefit cost analysis in the current program, because we don't want to commit to that yet, because we don't want to overburden what we're doing programmatically. What we said was, we have a program that we believe delivers sufficient benefits by scoping the problem to be in a reasonable size. There's lots of other ways DCP does that. But one of the reasons I came to SparkFund is I found this ability to say, hey, there's lots of great things that we can do. That is potential future upside that we want to enable and empower in the future. But we've identified a very reasonable approach that we can take that makes sense, that then can be built upon for additional benefits in the future. So right now we don't have resilience in the equation for what we're doing here. However, once these batteries are deployed, they are dispatched via software. And as the software gets more sophisticated, both in terms of analyzing the grid, the kind of work that EP does, for example, and then also dispatching with DERMS, once we've proven out those technologies can be useful for those other things, then we can start adding use cases to the batteries. And it may be a case where we say, hey, in the future, maybe we'll island some critical circuits using the batteries, the energy stored in the battery, and the analytics that an EP can provide and a DERMS provider can provide for dispatch. Maybe we can actually add that benefit. So we are trying to deploy this technology in a way that is for what the commission approved, but then recognizing we think there's future upside in future phases, or even in the use of these batteries could be future upside to deliver those types of benefits. This isn't a there's not a lot of regrets for deploying storage on the system. The question would be, okay, if this didn't make sense on the use cases you have, then you're going to deploy a bunch of stuff and everyone's going to be burdened with this. That we're like, no, we're going to make it make sense for the storage, for the deployment. And then we're going to let these other things be upside. And so the engineers who follow us and the grid planners who follow us and the executives who follow us can then extract more value out of that system. All of our progress is us standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, right? And building on their work and the opportunity to not only do cool stuff on our own, but then also be able to lay a foundation for other smart folks to come in behind and get more value is like really exciting. And that's not something that commissions have had an easy time dealing with, and utility executives had necessarily an easy time dealing with in the past. And that's where I say this is not just visionary, but extra visionary on the part of both the utility and the commission to say, we see that. I've heard this articulated. The first time I met some of the commissioners, they were articulating this vision in public forum. And I was like, wow, this is great stuff. Like they get it really fundamentally.
Yeah. Very good. So to close out, I was going to ask you, you have worked um, shaping policy, software, now getting actual megawatts deployed.
Yeah.
What is, I would say, I'd like to reflect on the work and what is meaningful. So what has felt, I was gonna say more real to you, or having worked in all those spaces, and then I'm gonna mix this in with the last question that I always like to ask, which is the second part: what keeps you optimistic about the future of our
Wow.
energy system?
So two different questions, two different answers here. So what is real? So I would say I've worked across a bunch of different fields, or different functions within the field of electric power generation and delivery. And I would say that they're all necessary. So we have a policy building block, we have business model innovation, we have technology is critical. Right, none of this happens without new tech being developed by scientists and engineers. So those are all foundational. And we need all of them. We need good policy, we need good business models, good regulation, we need good capital formation, right? We got to have the capital coming, we got to make a capital friendly environment. We have to have the technology there, and we have to have folks who can integrate it all together and entrepreneurs who can go make all this all happen together. So it's all critical. Like there's no piece that is like superfluous or less important. Now, I'm a recovering mechanical engineer myself. I got trained up in chemical plants, lots of stuff to look at, lots of moving pieces. I am a sucker for actually seeing things deployed in the ground. So I had a lot of satisfaction in my jobs in policy and a lot of satisfaction in my jobs and successes in various things we've gotten to do. I'm really lucky to work with incredible teams who've delivered some incredible successes. But nothing quite gets my blood going like seeing the wind farm that I worked on in Colorado actually have blades spinning, or to hopefully soon seeing these batteries deployed. Mechanical engineers, batteries don't do a whole lot. You just look at them, they kind of buzz a little bit, and that's about it. But hopefully, you don't see a recloser, flip, anything like that. You want them you're doing anything, but it's still there. Knowing what they're doing is part of this incredible machine that we have that is the electric power system, and understanding that we're running it better because we deployed real steel in the ground. Again, to touch it. I mean, my favorite part of the last year that I've had on the job has been a microgrid tour that Excel took us on in Colorado, and it's just fresh air out there with a bunch of smart people, learning from everybody's questions and answers and troubleshooting out in the field. There's nothing beats that. So I'm a sucker for that. And it gets back, I guess that's a lead into what I'm most optimistic about. When I started working in clean energy, I was in grad school. And at the time, there was an energy conference at the grad school, and it was 2 days of sessions organized by students. And there was one session that was alternative energy, and that included algal biofuels, solar, and fracking. Right, and kind of aging myself. This was 2005, 2006. We got one table, 1 hour out of 2 days was alternative energy. And it was really kind of cute. I felt like I was like the hippie the other B school students kind of, thought was, cute or whatever, thinking about clean energy. And then over the years, we've just seen the amount of talent that has come. And now that energy conference is all about renewable energy, all about clean energy and the grid transformation that's occurring. And so I would say the thing that gives me the most optimism is just the people, the quality of talent that wants to come in here and work collaboratively and work both in a way that's going to give them financial security for their families, but also security for our communities and our planet, that realization that there's a real opportunity to do that, and seeing people continue to get excited and fun in this. It used to be that working electric power is pretty boring, and now working electric power is pretty darn exciting. And everybody has questions for me when I go to the farmer's market or I'm at a cocktail party or wherever. People have questions. That's pretty exciting to see. And I think just that talent that's coming in and the cooperation that we have across those talented individuals is what gives me optimism and hope.
Thank you for the conversation, Tanuj. It was really great to hear about your career in the energy industry and also about the exciting work that SparkFund is doing. It is great to hear that distributed capacity procurement and your work with utilities is becoming a reality. Exciting work ahead. And thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Julieta, and not only for this opportunity to chat with you today, but also for all the good work you guys are doing and helping us get to those goals that we have.
Absolutely. The switch is produced by Electric Power Engineers, and we are turning the switch off. Until next time.